pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation forever. What's happening? Benton here. Will anyone else be here? Is the question. And if I do schedule the live stream ahead of time, this one was scheduled the day before. It's not unusual for the stream to actually begin early for anyone who is accustomed to listening live. And something new of late has been no live chat. And I'm a regular live chatter in live streams myself, and there occasionally someone is live streaming with no live chat, and then I suppose at that point, is the material interesting enough for me as a listener to stick around without being able to comment? So let's see if Benton here is able to accomplish this. Maybe yes, maybe no. We shall see. Oh, goodness. 2 likes and 3 viewers. Fantastic. Although usually when I comment on the number of viewers, some of them leave. But that's okay. We don't see you there. I have no idea who's here. I can't even be communicated with. But anyway, thanks for being here. And the title of this stream, I had a thought last night, which was, who am I even, who are these streams even for? Well, they're for yours truly, myself, the royal we. Certainly gets something out of performing these live streams. So there's that. And there's still something of a replay crew. There's a smattering of views, pardon me, after the stream. As we see the views barely cracking double digits, if at all. I'm sorry, triple digits, if at all. Let's work on that enunciation. But yeah, I had the thought, who's even listening to this, and not in a derogatory, pejorative fashion. I do know that there's folks who listen, a fairly hardcore small group that, some will filter into that group and some will leave over time. In fact, many ladies have seemingly left that group based on the YouTube stats, if any of that is to believe the 100% male audience at this point. Although I guess a female could choose to click the male box for whatever reason. And certainly not entitled to views, and also grateful, right? Always grateful that anyone would listen to such foolishness at all, because they say, well, what do you mean foolishness? Well, it's always in the context of a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions with waking dreams, surrealistic elements of unreality. So yes, foolish, and then, for entertainment purposes. That's the reason for this. Not if someone decides that this is instructive, well, I find many videos, that other folks may find entertainment or to be entertaining, also to be instructive or informative, even if that's not the intent of the content creator. So those elements are present. But yeah, I had the idea that at this point, based on, and I'm not accusing anyone, this is more of a thought experiment. This is not an accusation of a person being an agent, such as a government agent. And certainly, thankfully, right, what a blessing that old Benton here, is not prone to such paranoid ideologies. There's, anyone, I would assert that virtually everyone has thoughts that, would line up with a being described as paranoid or paranoiac. Um, but that's not the reason for thinking or speaking this way. It's to wonder, are there people on YouTube, and I would assume so, who are more or less obligated in some way, to be ready to respond or to, make their own content in order to counteract, some of what may be asserted over here, you know. So, at a certain point, what proportion of the audience is listening more or less because they have no other choice? Again, a thought experiment, just sort of playing around with an idea. And then I do like the term sys-agent or sys-agent, perhaps, not a word, SYS, and then realizing, well, that's the whole cisgender. And it sounds some type of way, cis, CIS. And I wonder if that has anything to do with the concept of system agents or sys-agent, right? The idea of an Agent Smith from the conspiracy circles. And I will go a little inside baseball with the so-called truth community, the panelverse, if that's all right, at the risk of alienating some of the live audience. It does seem like the replay crew might be a little more heavily stacked towards the so-called, the very niche so-called truth community here on YouTube. Various, mostly panel channels, as this one was for quite some time, hosting StreamYard panels. StreamYard, for whatever reason, their website says that my 20 free hours restarts yesterday, August the 6th. So for some reason, my free hours have not restarted. Maybe I need to delete my cookies. That'll probably fix it, actually. Delete the old browser history. Who knows? I emailed them, but, in these times, can anyone even expect any sort of resolution of an issue by contacting support? And is it even support? But let's not derail or sidetrack too much. So occasionally, because I have a lot of these channels, their usernames, even though I no longer have them in my feeds or am subscribed for the most part, generally I know what to type in, like @ and the YouTube username. Or some folks, like Jack Talcott, just type it into the search bar, the channel comes up. But, checking in this many years after the pandemic, and just, somebody did a live stream last night, a channel. I might mention it. I haven't decided yet. And this is not to put anybody on blast or create any sort of controversy or drama, but, just randomly clicking, maybe 40 minutes into the video, the live stream, and there's old Tucker Carlson on the screen, So now folks are covering, the normie news, right? The, whatever that is. Now, it's possible that a person was making a specific point. Now, and not that there's anything inherently wrong with taking in content. I'm not even saying that. But to me, that's an indicator that people are regularly in the so-called truth community watching folks like Tucker Carlson. And then, is it really a bridge too far to recognize that, perhaps unironically, if that's a thing, with notions around make America great again, the unfucking of the system, as if that were a thing, right? Which, as we know, is shout out to Mark Passio, not the person, the ideas, that factions that seek, change within the system, in fact, in all reality, merely want to seize control of the system in order to attempt to bend it to their will or what they believe they would like to see. Again, traditional family values that are just completely impossible, generally, right? Generally speaking. Now, folks have always, perpetually, folks have lived something akin to traditional family values, whatever that even is in the modern age. But is it ever not the modern age? And you see the layers and the levels of examination involved in even mentioning some of these various topics, fraught with peril to cover this properly, especially with, again, not manifesting, but the possibilities of early onset dementia. I mean, who knows? Benton used to be a little sharper in certain ways. But 50, gonna turn 50 soon. Um, the big 50, as they say. Well, perhaps perhaps the being will turn 50 in about a week, however many days that is. The 12th, if anybody cares. Um, Certainly not anticipating any gifts, but you never know. One never knows. And, so even if for some reason I had a desire to watch these channels, it's just I can't do the normie news. And even back in the Davy Crocco days, I found it difficult to listen or watch when he went into just sometimes he would be playing, Fox News but he was doing it contextually. Crocco was doing it while covering, larger stories himself. This was, a lot of times for reference. Um, and I would say that I'm disappointed, but it's not surprising. And in certain ways, some of these are the same folks that helped me, pull my head out of the fucking 24-hour a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week news cycle. I was certainly smitten with for a long ass time, right? Uh, and not necessarily watching the content so much as reading the news articles, and I do way less of that these days. But I did happen to, right before I went live, and just wanted to mention that, um, that some of these folks that I have high regard for in certain ways, and overall opinion hasn't necessarily changed. But something I've talked about, everyone always reveals themselves over time, right? And then again, the strength of the delusion itself, this realm as delusion, just how strong it is that it's with Benton's level of attainment and practices and the unlocking of the achievement within the game of true knowledge of self, that even I am, you know, um, on a day in, day out basis, there are moments when I find myself too strongly identified with the realm, as if it were, some version of as presented. Um, and I realize that folks have an ability to watch Tucker Carlson and intelligently and perhaps not get swept away in it. My only contention is that watching any sort of figurehead personality gatekeeper type, regardless of the politics, right? It's not an accusation at the level of politics. It would be the same as someone else just pick somebody on the left. There's no difference really as far as it's a red flag. It's a bad sign. And why is that the spot I dropped? So maybe it was maybe Tucker Carlson was up there the whole time. I have no idea. Pausing and then commenting and unpausing and commenting. Perhaps maybe he was having a go at the ideas of Tucker Carlson. I doubt it, but who knows? And then all this Epstein nonsense and just everything going. Oh well, it's all a distraction. Yeah, that's what the sheep were bleeding in the early stages of the pandemic. And then the normies and the NPCs picked up the call. It's all a distraction. And at a certain point, again, shout out to Crocco, rest in peace. But I used to say, thank God for Davy Crocco. Otherwise, I would be perhaps the most dense person in the so-called truth community. And eventually, it does even penetrate Benton's density here. Now, did I forget what penetrates? Oh yes, notions around. Well, okay, a distraction from what exactly? Because the idea that the masses would need to be distracted. Number one, it implies that the masses have any power. Well, the reality is the masses have zero power in this country, none, right? And no power whatsoever as far as the actual people. And then, it seems to. Uh, did I lose the point yet again? My goodness. What in the world? And this is some proof of how visual old Benton is. It would be nice to have some sort of visual cue, and I don't mean a live chat. I mean just even if it was my own note taking as I'm speaking, or the technology would probably allow a transcript where whatever I'm saying out loud could be on a screen somewhere. If I had something to glance at, it would actually be seamless, converting what I'm speaking into visual form. Anyway, no idea what I was on about. But then as soon as I pick up another topic, that's typically when the remembrance comes. So bear with me one moment. Much appreciated. Huh. Oh, yes, pandemic. The idea of a distraction. And then, so my thing is, until the person knows exactly what the distraction is from, what does it represent for the sheep to go around bleating the idea of, it's all a distraction? It seems to me like that's system speak or sys speak, right? System speak. Now, then, people who are unknowingly engaging in system speak, are they functioning as some level of a sys agent, right? A systems administrator, even, right? From a computer simulation type of framework. The idea, well, it's all a simulation anyway. And then again, Benton's density finally being breached, and it's like, okay, but what exactly is being simulated? And I won't go through the entire discourse, but one cannot just, it's simply not logical, or it's provably false that one could observe what's going on around, and the whatever this is that the royal we is enmeshed in, and just point at it and say, well, this is being simulated. That doesn't work, and I've explained why, but I'll not get into that here. It takes too long. And now, is it, again, back to the notion, is that still the prevailing notion? It's all a distraction. Okay, and it also implies, so first it implies power, that the system would have, and this is all system speak. So are these people functioning as sys-agents? Well, if this is what they're on about, and again, I couldn't even bring myself to listen to the stream, so maybe I'm way off base. I'm going from deductive reasoning, playing a hunch, intuition, and all of this. But it's this notion that, again, I hear the sheep speak and react as if the system and the administrators of the system at the top, the so-called elites, well, they fear the sheeple waking up, as if that were a thing. And I've also explained why that's not a thing. To wake up does not accomplish what is assumed it would accomplish for an individual to, and really what we're saying is for an individual to come into grasping and accepting certain information, right? With respect to conspiracies and the diabolical machinations of the power structure, right? Power in the name of the Lord Christ Jesus, by the way. As I was walking the streets of Los Angeles yesterday morning, just ran into a fellow that wanted to have a conversation with me, some most likely demon-infested person, right? Perhaps he noticed, the kingdom of God wandering by, right? I said, what do you mean? Well, the kingdom of God is within me. And in fact, that my audacity to mention that to this most likely demon, and apologies for jumping around topics, but the sheer audacity of blatantly stating to a potentially a likely demon infested person, that the kingdom of God is within me, thus, and also to make the point, well, it's not outside of me, then it's within me, right? Where is it, and where is it not to be found? And then immediately telling me, well, no, that's not true, right? Well, no, that's not, no, because he had already, I was spitting facts and game and dropping knowledge, right? And what I've noticed about people is that, they have to be heard, and then, so obviously, well, not obviously, but so this was a lesson for Benton, and I understand I'm jumping around and not even telling the story, but it wasn't that interesting, although it did lead to some preaching in the streets on the back end, a lot of which involved me just loudly proclaiming the power in the name of Jesus in the streets of Los Angeles, certainly one of the most wicked cities in this wicked nation, right? Scam nation, America, the vanguard, the realms, the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realms, vanguard of all things scammy, scummy, um, fraudulent, um, the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of various financial frauds, you know, uh, the prototypical workshop, Satan's own workshop of prototypes of various technologies for fleecing the populace, right? their resources, as we see now. Is rent is now considered a luxury. Being able to afford a place to rent is a luxury for many folks, and then who are immediately gaslit because, well, clearly they've chosen poorly to end up in a situation where they cannot afford rent. Okay, sure. Um, and recognizing again, old Benton is going to have the opportunity to teach himself to stand there passively and listen to whatever these bozos have to say. Because that's the only way someone's perhaps going to hear what I say. And, God or which I don't even like using that term, but, perhaps the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible had a message for this fellow, and that perhaps it was old Benton here's job to deliver it. Maybe that was the message. Maybe the message was delivered in the context of a back and forth where at a certain point, each person was speaking, past the other one in a way. However, I find it very difficult and inappropriate to just stand there and allow, right, which does kind of sound authoritarian, to permit or allow the other person to go off into a discourse of just untruth and folly, and whether or not they know, maybe they're just repeating things they've heard, right? Now, the outright rejection of true statements that I would find uncontroversial and mostly uncontested. Well, why are they forcefully being contested in the moment by this person who, may have some knowledge of how the world works, perhaps not, just some, I don't know, mid-30s fella that I ran into on the streets who was in some version of a, government subsidized housing, maybe most likely was a street level drug addict in the past, perhaps, and now he's housed in this apartment building. Again, he started the conversation as I walked past, and which is interesting. And I'm going to have something to say, right? And he asked me, basically just wanting to chit chat, I guess. But it was like, oh, are you headed to work? Well, I've got something to say on the subject of employment. And then, if this guy has been put in this apartment and now he's going to be forced or compelled to play these various games, because I understand how these systems work. So whether or not has any history of maintaining long-term employment, right, which Benton has, when I was his age, I had a long history of maintaining employment. Perhaps this gentleman doesn't. I don't know. Perhaps he has a job now. Don't know. Never made it to that far in the conversation, but certainly, whatever, unless he's disabled, right, could be in Social Security being a big topic. Social Security Administration, maybe he's disabled, air quotes, right, in various ways. The system having accepted that he's giving up in some way, perhaps. Again, I'm speculating. Appeared to be some version of a black fella, right? Light-skinned black fella, native to the country, native English speaker, and just rejection after rejection after rejection. And is this built into people at the level of the? And this is what I call sophisticated idiots, right? They don't have very little actual knowledge, little to no ability to process data or think and reason for themselves. But the psychological programming functions in their mind and in their psyche where they always have an answer just at the ready, right? But I'm introducing, not necessarily introducing concepts I'm not introducing novel concepts necessarily. I'm crafting in the moment a discourse, and I'm doing that in a novel fashion, right? Using ideas that are somewhat commonplace. And probably what it is, in fact, is that what I've noticed with people, and this is almost everybody, lacking intelligence, right? And it may not be that they lack an inborn intelligence, it's that they haven't utilized it through processing data. Lacking intelligence. I think a skunk is sprayed. What happens is each concept that gets introduced, they need to personally relate to it in some way, perhaps even if that's to reject the notion outright. And also, it's an inability. Now that I think about it, it's an inability to access the yin form, which would be trust. And actually, now that I review this scenario in my mind, that must have been the problem, because he was, interjecting forcefully to reject what I was saying, but without the proper knowledge, without being able to make a proper case for why what I was asserting would be invalid, and it certainly wasn't invalid. Because I initially began speaking about employment as well, that's the thing that makes rich people richer, every moment into perpetuity. So, certainly no honor in participating in that. But again, he may be living in a way where he's not going to have a choice. But then, is this merely, is he headed back to street level drug addiction also? Who knows? Again, this is not for me to determine. This is all just with my own knowledge and experience profiling in the moment. But what the first big idea that he rejected was the biblical notion of the kingdom of God is within me, right? Within you. And he's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. I'm like, well, that's what the Bible says. And meanwhile, I asserted no authority whatsoever. I'm referring to a book, right? I did not give my opinion on the book. So then it's not too much farther in the conversation. He's like, and the Bible's not 100% accurate anyway. And I'm like, when did I claim the Bible was 100% accurate? Now, not that he claimed that was my claim, but that was certainly implied. It's like, yeah. And I could have just said, yeah, I agree with you. But it's like, yeah, I didn't. When did I say that? But first he said, no, it's not in the Bible. And only after I was going to pull my phone out and show him that, yes, it is. Oh, well, then it's okay. Well, the Bible's not 100% accurate. It's like, okay, when did I say that it is? And then looking at the psychological programming of, is it even possible to have a conversation in the streets anymore? And I would say, no, it's not. And then even the people that I've met recently that have humored me, who actually, they've had some level of insight and knowledge, especially this one fellow when I first got back to town, who's claimed to be a street preacher and a Christian and all of these things. I haven't seen him since, of course. But recognizing after talking to him that he was merely humoring me, sort of to subvert, my own activities, and then perhaps to gain information. Again, some version of a systems agent or a sys-agent. Again, whether he knows it or not, if the psychological programming has now become such a part of the psyche and the very identity of the individual, the bleeding sheep, the sheeple so-called, what's the difference? I would say there is no. It's actually, the system probably prefers the subterfuge, right? The down low sys-agents, right? Those who may function in various ways as agents of the system and don't know it. And of course, famously, Benton here has said that, because of the direct formalized mind control process that old Benton here was subjected to through the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, that I certainly never joined or consented to any of that. I was a minor child. In fact, had absolutely nothing to do with the organization as a legal adult. That's a true fact. Nothing whatsoever. All of my dealings with Watchtower was as a minor child, lest we forget. And I feel a little bit of the anger and the annoyance rising. So one moment and that only ever happens because of improper identification. Although, as noted on prior live streams, there is a healing effect where, some of the tissues and some of the energies that have yet to escape the old energy sphere, well, they do find it convenient to express in these moments. Thank you, Jesus. And if someone's not a Jesus person and listens to this, I do want to make it clear, because I'm beginning to detect there have been a smattering again of new listeners, some of which I might watch their channels. That's also possible. Who knows? Or maybe it's people who've noticed my comments on other channels and just found their way here. Who knows? But I'm unbothered by anybody who wants to make any joke or make any statement about Jesus. I'm unoffendable, and it doesn't bother me whatsoever. And in fact, I respect people's opinions. And religion is demonic. All religion, man-made and demonic. I'm talking about Christ here. I'm not talking about religion. And I understand. I myself was quite turned off by especially Christianity for many years. It took me a long time to even be able to revisit, biblical topics without just frothing with anger. So yes, I get it. So I want to make that clear to anyone who may not have heard me make such statements. And I tell Christians, hey, your religion is demonic. Christianity is demonic. That's what it is. It's dead. It's of this place. And I will continue to tell them. They will continue to not hear me, right? Or maybe they will. And how is a seed planted in the first place? I don't require anything out of these real life interactions. It's if that was fertile soil from a biblical parable, and I was able to plant a seed, because here's what I left them with. So when we agreed mutually to part, which is interesting, if you ever want to notice the tactics of a manipulator, or someone who may have read the 48 Laws of Power, or maybe somebody who's their pimp hand might be kind of strong, because see, I notice all of these tactics because I've used a lot of these tactics, and again, not to be proud of it, but and generally with females, but it's that I was taking my leave after he finally said something so foolish that it was like, all right, I'm out of here. Mainly like, hey, I can see that there's no and I didn't say it, but it's like, okay, there's clearly not going to be an intelligent discourse. I'm out of here. So he then did not make me stay, but he then implored me to remain in the conversation to some extent, but then only so that he could end the interaction, right? This sort of power game that certainly old Benton here is acquainted with, and typically rises above and no longer engages in such. But I called him out on it. I said, aha, that's exactly what I was doing moments ago. They just sort of laughing at him like, I see what you did there, buddy, which is funny. But what we parted on was, he was basically like, blessings, or I hope you have a blessed day, which is a little condescending. And then, there's a Southern sort of a low class Southern kind of ghetto expression of already, right? That I picked up, culturally. So that's how I typically respond when somebody, says have a blessed day or whatever. Because typically after I've said have a good day, or hope you have a good day, or have a good day. And I'm like, already. And then I said true knowledge, because I started the conversation when he began to give me static. I'm like, well, look, true knowledge appears, and you can't be quiet long enough to hear the true knowledge. I just tell them that to their face, right? And somehow they're never offended. Like, it's never fighting words, or because it's consistent with my personality. It's congruous with who I am as a person. Again, in the context, not Benton, the core essence, the performer, the personality in the context of the performance, right? The way I come across, it's congruent with the way I come across. And I said, true knowledge is to know that what I am is the blessing. And he's like, no, or I think I just said, I am the blessing. Right? He's like, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. I said, because no matter what I am is basically, my actions are and again, it was in the shorthand, and I'm bad at remembering how I phrase things, even though I'm really good in the moment of phrasing things properly. It was some version of, as I'm walking away, sort of loudly proclaiming that, it's basically each person's actions represent blessing or curse. There's no middle ground. And maybe that was the seed to be planted, is, maybe he could take that idea in. And I hear sometimes people walk by and hear me talking, and it triggers something in them where they want to start to talk. And so occasionally I hear, people talking, but they're not having a conversation with another person. It's just, discoursing or speaking in the way that I am. Who knows? And, and that's true. Like, this world of death and the game of lies, the blessing must always be something external to the being. And the blessing can never be anything originating internally within the individual. And, that is, again, further evidence of the nature of this place, that it's complete. Many, if not most folks, if not virtually all, will recognize the concept of blessing, right? But it can never originate within Benton, or presumably any individual. The blessing is always something external. And I even realized with the Christians and these other people who want to pray over the food and bless the food. And at a certain point, I'm like, no, the food is the blessing. What are you talking about? Like the food, what? Bless the food? What's wrong with the food? Why does it need to be blessed? Is the food, somehow in need? Does it need to be redeemed on some level? Like what? Bless the food? What are you talking about? The food is a blessing, right? Especially in the context of the Bible and talking about the birds of the air, neither sowing nor reaping nor gathering into barns. And then, the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread type shit. It's like, that sounds like blessing to me. The fact that in my life, I've found it to be true. I've tested the principle of, neither sowing nor reaping at times for many years on end and still eating every day if that's what I chose to do that day. If it wasn't me choosing to fast, I had food every day. So, it leads me to believe that most likely that will continue, right? And is that not a blessing to not have to worry about where the next meal's coming from? Sounds like a blessing. But then inversion or antithesis presents the meal as something that needs to be blessed. No, it is a blessing. And is it a curse to treat something as if it wasn't a blessing? So now individuals out here, if they are what I am, well, what I am is the blessing or representative of blessing. So then again, to curse one's own blessing, that's the entire purpose of this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, is to have each individual, again, anybody with this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, AKA Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, anybody possessed of that, to have them, in fact, treat what they represent, what their core essence represents, to treat that as if it were a curse. See? So there's no possibility. Blessing, then, if this realm is allowed to define blessing, it will only ever exist outside of any discrete individual, right? Even as much as somebody might refer to another person's actions and say, well, they're an angel, right? Well, yeah, sounds like a blessing. But what if that same person was like, yeah, I am the blessing? Oh, no, you're not. Like, what? What are you talking about? Then again, maybe they think I mean Benton the performer, right? Which maybe that is a blessing. Contextually at times, perhaps. Who knows? Can't call it. So yeah, so that happened. And then various instructions, proper instructions around how some of these concepts work, spiritual concepts tied in biblically, because it is still mostly a Christian context, although not across the board, certainly not in large cities, but more often than not, if somebody's interacting with these concepts in a religious sense, it's going to be Christian. And I'm not a Christian, just for the record, if anybody's unclear about that. I certainly would not want to be confused for these people. But yes, Benton here doing, for a long time has considered following the teachings of Jesus from the Gospels of the New Testament to be a worthy goal to aim at and to aspire to. And certainly at this time, believe or know myself to be following those teachings, right? Certainly. But then again, in a context of being taught by the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, according to John 14:26, teaching me all things and bringing unto my remembrance. So in fact, I've recently read portions of the book of John and realized, the Comforter has actually recently taught me a lot of what Jesus is quoted as saying, but then also realizing, look, what Jesus is quoted as saying here is inverted, or it's intentionally been fucked with and stepped on, because some of this is simply just does not apply, or is clearly intentionally sort of muddying the waters, right? So the Bible is a dead book, dead words on a dead page. Its nature is death, like it or not, folks. And in fact, being of this realm is stepped on, adulterated, regardless of the reason why. It's got a lot of problems. If I would say the Bible is has problems to the level that no reasonable, sane person could swallow it whole, meaning to accept it as the every single word of it, the divinely inspired, word of so-called God or Heavenly Father. No, absolutely not. The KJV in the English language, absolutely not. That is simply not the case. Anybody that subscribes to that, guess what? We're all wrong from time to time. And I understand that the delusion is very strong. I understand the mind control is very strong. I understand people strongly believe this. It's simply not true. And even if it were, something else I was working with yesterday and between the ears walking around was, again, the Kybalion, Kybalion, Kybalion. The notion from the Kybalion, well, within delusion, now the Kybalion doesn't say within delusion, but the idea that all truth is merely half truth, well, within delusion, with its waking dreams, surrealistic notions of unreality, that seems like that makes sense to me, right? So again, in that context, or utilizing that filter, that assists in the reconciliation of some of these ideas, and that does seem to be where old Benton here diverts from the majority of the other content creators in the so-called truth community, is perpetually seeking to reconcile these ideas logically, rationally, and reasonably. And the refusal or the incompetence, maybe a learned helplessness or an intentionally, maybe some channels want to appear to do that while just falling short of actually accomplishing it, again, are these functioning as agents of the system, right? And not in a paranoid way, because again, defenders of an indefensible system, the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. What I'm finding is the channel that I referred to, that I haven't mentioned yet, I haven't decided, but if the discourse is representative of a defender of the system, is that not something that functions in real time, on an ongoing basis as a agent Smith or a system, an agent of the system? I would say yes. The unknowing part, does the system care? And then what is the incentive, right? How are these individuals incentivized to perhaps unknowingly function as systems agents, sys-agents, sys-agents? I like sys-agent. That's got a nice ring to it. Innovating in the space yet again, perhaps. Benton never fails to innovate in the space over time. That's just what it is. Or rarely, I should say. Never is not a good term to use there, but yes, rarely. And then my thing is, it is in fact nuclear family, and not to demean or impugn the nuclear family. In fact, that's how I grew up, and there were some drawbacks that I would not necessarily blame on the nuclear family as a structure, but overall, Benton here found it quite beneficial. And this is not an exaggeration, it's the most, my gigantic scary father, who was, either in the home or he was, could be reached by telephone. And he certainly was coming home at some point that day. Without him, most likely old Benton here, with his scientifically provable high testosterone, would be dead or in prison. And that's really no other alternatives. Especially looking at where I'm from and all of that, dead or in prison, it's probably the only, other than, the spiritual guidance and protection of the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible. That's always been there. That's never left me. Isn't that interesting? And became aware of it quite early on, after getting the fuck away from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, of course. And again, back to the earlier point that was never fully fleshed out around, it's certainly possible that they made me some version of a Manchurian candidate, and not in the sense of what that actually means literally, figuratively. How do I know, basically, what they may have programmed and put into my mind that I'm unaware of? And in fact, I met a person on the streets that I hung out with for a while in Austin, and he was more or less referring to himself as some version of a CIA agent. And eventually I pressed him a little bit. I typically just sort of listen and let things go. And what I found is strategically, and this is probably Machiavellian in a way, it's better, and it's also what the cult taught me to do, Jehovah's Witnesses, is to listen with acceptance, trusting that I'm able to take in what he's saying, and doing it. The cult wants me to do it so the person feels accepted, so that maybe they'll join the cult, right? But I've thankfully never brought anybody into the Jehovah's Witnesses. But I have the training to do this. But at a certain point, I finally just was like, okay, but what makes you think you're a CIA? Like, I need something that makes logical sense here. Otherwise, I'm just going to chalk it up to paranoia. And he was more or less like acknowledging the mind control, and just like he's basically saying, how would I know? Meaning, wouldn't it be possible for me to have gone through whatever version of, SRA or a splitting of the psyche? And he didn't have the terminology for this, but he seemed to have some understanding of how this would operate. Um, you know, a Southern person, without a formal education, he seemed pretty tapped in and intuitive in ways, and a cleaned up meth head, which they all still do meth. It's more of a person that's transcended meth, where they're able to just sort of use it, not responsibly, but the idea of using the drug and not letting it use you, which I hate that expression, but it does kind of make sense. And that's where we get into the people who say, oh yeah, well, they'll acknowledge that they used to be meth heads, but then, oh, they don't do it anymore. No, they still do. Believe me, they absolutely still do it. It's just not, it's not all day, every day, to the exclusion of anything else. And again, there's always exceptions to everything, even that statement. But, he made the valid point that how the fuck would he know if they mind controlled him and he's functioning on the streets of Austin as a CIA agent? How the fuck would he know? What's the difference anyway? I said, yeah, you're right, man. And he didn't explain it that way. He explained it in a way that I was able to understand. That's what I took away from it. So same with me. Why? It's possible. How would I know? I don't know what they done to me as a child. I know that I don't remember much of my childhood, which is typically not a good sign, they say. Who knows? And I don't want to make it about that. I don't want to make it about that. So yeah, it's all very interesting to think about. And then just, hilarious that looking at that picture from the thumbnail, that's that big balls fella, supposedly. Hilarious, and let's think back to, a few years ago when all this wokeism was off the charts everywhere in your face, and the LGBT and the trans, and everything was just running rampant even before the pandemic, and then it just went bonkers during the pandemic. And then so the people who are more MAGA, and that's most of the so-called truth community, sadly. And I say sadly because then people are like, oh, well, you think the other side? No, both are equally ridiculous. There's no sides. The fact that there's sides proves that the people have no power. Why would the people allow themselves to be divided? In fact, if the people had power, they wouldn't be dividable. They would be indivisible. Now I'm remembering what the Pledge of Allegiance: indivisible, right? One nation under God, indivisible. Well, what we're expected to believe is referenced by the term God there is indivisible. Well, this nation, how could this nation be under God and simultaneously divisible? We're already into bad. For the lovers of America, this is already, just looking at the formative writings of the fucking country, it's already debunkable based on what's happening. But yeah, the right wing being a little more inclined to nationalism, but let's not forget, especially as much as people want to talk about liberals are also nationalistic. It's the fucking lefty commies that they know enough. The leaders of the lefty commies understand that what's here now has to be destroyed to bring in the communism. Okay. Now, meanwhile, some of the communism is already here. And I would argue that's because various institutions and various structures socially and morally within society have been destroyed. One of them being the extended family, perhaps living near each other and interacting more like Latin folks have historically done, but did not Americans or, proper white folks, right? Regular white folks. Yeah, I said it. Regular white folks. If anybody's offended, not my problem. But, well, or unless they make it my problem, which I'm not looking for a fight either way. So let's not get into that. But I don't have a dog in the hunt because I don't even really identify as a white person. It's just, yeah, I'm quite pale and, there's really no escaping it. But I don't, strictly speaking, I don't even really identify as a white person. It's like, yeah, he's white. But it's like, yeah, how come, I was expressed very differently than the other white boys, and I don't even want to get into the difference. I'll just start bragging about, my youth. There's really no reason to do that. And again, when properly identified, who cares? Right? When properly identified within myself anyway. It's difficult to brag about one's past achievements without being strongly identified with delusion. Does it matter really? What's the fucking difference overall? None. So, now that it's more, the pendulum has swung back more towards the right wing in the MAGA types. We really, now is the opportunity to see them as they are. It was difficult when the woke was running roughshod. It was difficult for Benton here through his density to see these folks as they are. Well, now that they feel like things have swung in their favor, here we go. So, and then I talk about the destruction of these various things in society. Well, the destruction of the extended family, and then arguably the destruction of the nuclear family. Well, that leaves a vacuum, and this idea that nature abhors a vacuum, right? Well, something's going to enter into whatever's been destroyed, and I would argue that what's entered in is communism. In level, there's layers of society that, as far as I can tell, is now fully communist, and again, probably has been since the fucking 60s. Again, my whole life in a communist on some level America, and I'm not. I do speak in a hyperbolic fashion much of the time. No hyperbole, actual communism, but sort of contextual or situational, or only, again, multi-layered and multifaceted. Not a binary of, capitalism or communism. Absolutely not. Multi-layered, multifaceted layers of communism. That's where you get people saying, well, Benton with some of his more left-leaning ideas, but then, sort of socially conservative in certain ways, right? But just because that's how I was raised, not. I will say things like, yeah, the best way to raise a child is in a home with a father born a man and a woman born a mother. That's the best way to do it. But also saying, yeah, doesn't mean that other ways can't also prove effective. I'm saying what's best for the child. That is obviously an idea that people would associate with conservatism. Yeah, who cares? That's true. That's a provably true statement. A person of integrity and honor and honesty is not, and courage is not going to concern themselves with the potential connotations. That's a principle, see. And a principle, we know it's a principle when the circumstances or the climate or the context changes, the principle doesn't change. When I know something to be true, I'm going to say it. Again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. I'm sure I've fallen short of that at times. But overall, that's not going to be my problem. I'm not going to concern myself with, okay, now people are going to think I'm MAGA or whatever. Well, they probably think that anyway because of how you sound, buddy, with that accent. And I can explain until I'm blue in the face that my home county in Arkansas voted for Kamala. Well, nobody cares about that. Who cares? Arkansas is a red state. Who cares? Doesn't matter that where I'm from in Arkansas and where I actually strongly considered moving back to during the pandemic. My home county, Jefferson County, Arkansas, is a pretty fucking strongly Democrat. Well, nobody cares. It's a red state. And apologies for talking politics in the first place. But so yeah, these people want to be involved in a 24-hour news cycle. They just want everything going their way. And when the 24-hour news cycle had too much of the woke bullshit, it was anathema to them, and they had to flee. Right? Well, and it's been to my benefit to get off of that, certainly. the 24-hour news cycle. But bear with me. I see I'm rambling a bit, so apologies for the lack of focus here. Uh, let me get right. Oh man, I do need to take it a little easy with the live streams, especially since my data cycle just restarted. Although since I'm on the T-Mobile network right now, and because US Mobile, my carrier, they frequently changing how they do their plans. I might be on actual unlimited, but it's deprioritized T-Mobile, because what I actually signed up for was Verizon 100 gig a month with 50 gig hotspot, but it's all priority data, and it really is. Like when my shit slows down on Verizon, everybody's shit is slowing down. I can assure you, it's the real deal Holyfield data. But now I'm on, because they let you switch networks, T-Mobile, AT&T, or Verizon. So when I was in San Francisco, Verizon, for whatever reason, was effectively unusable. So I switched to T-Mobile, which actually works really good also. But I have noticed at peak times, I do get my data is deprioritized. Well, that's not 5 a.m. Pacific when I'm doing these live streams. So I've got plenty of bandwidth. So for all I know, I can just use as much data as I want. Really, it's hard to find these. And why is it so difficult to find this out? Well, it's because it's in a corporation's best interest. This is an MVNO, a reseller. They buy access to bandwidth and then resell it. Well, it's in their best interest for me to not necessarily understand that. And it's in the best interest of the corporation for me not to be able to get that information. And then for defenders of the system, and I think that's what I got into earlier, was the defenders of the indefensible system exposing themselves, and then what motivates them. And then they end up behaving, whether they know it or not, as sys-agents or sys-agents. And then at a certain point, like I said, whether they know it or not, are they obligated to regularly listen to this channel? And so that's where I got the idea for, are these people, am I merely giving a homework assignments? Because if most of the who used to listen to me is gone, and maybe a couple of new folks have showed up here and there, and then just other people dropping in and dropping out, perhaps, and like, what the fuck is this? What's he on about? And who knows? And then the actual thumbnail, just how obvious of a psyop that is, and then who's that intended for? See, that picture's intended for a boomer, right, who can't look at the picture and visually see that someone has artistically framed that in a way, because old Benton here is not a photographer, not a trained photographer, but I've always had an eye for composition of a picture, and I've proven it over time. But folks are willing to accept or reject that. It's your own business. But over time, I've proven to myself that I am able to compositionally, especially with the framing, I'm able to capture some pretty decent art, arguably autistic photography at times. And it's obvious to me as the moment I see that thumbnail, that's cropped in from a larger picture, but that's obviously something that's been composed, especially with the American, and then the guy's head is covering up. So it says America, and then you got a white dude with a bloody face. So, that's a pretty clear, strong, now what is that designed? What messages are there at a subliminal level? And it's not even subliminal, but, what message is that intending to send? Well, it's like, it's us versus them from the perspective of MAGA. And it's like MAGA must always be under attack from the enemy, right? And then now we have strong authority, personified by the president, who's supposedly running the executive branch. And then people want to say, and I see it to this day, people talking about trucking in the YouTube comments. Oh, well, Jimmy Carter ruined trucking, and the government needs to deregulate or whatever. And then somebody with half a brain says, well, explain to me how one man ruined an entire industry. It's a great point. No, the government did those things. Jimmy Carter was the Mr. Peanut. Now that's a peanut farmer from Georgia. But then Jimmy Carter was the Mr. Peanut. He was the figurehead. And so just scapegoat it. Humans need a scapegoat to ridicule, mock, and blame everything on. So that's a big function of a president, right? So Trump, right? or his fans and his sycophants, the idea that he's doing things and swaggering around, right? And boldly striding into these meetings and throwing his weight around. That's how people have been programmed to view America, the big, walk softly and carry a big stick, right? Well, now we have somebody with his body language showing that the big stick is there. Well, isn't it interesting? And that was presumably how the presidents of the past, who maybe not as much video exists, that's how sort of their activities would have been portrayed. Meanwhile, in the age of video and deep fakes and propaganda off the charts and all of this technology, it's interesting to me that as America is seemingly the big stick is in fact maybe not what it used to be, the big stick having been cut down to size, right? So at the time in which maybe that's becoming less of a thing, now we have swaggering, chest out, Trump, in the way he behaves. Again, all of this is symbols. This is all very symbolic, and it's leading, the populace in certain ways, certainly, and seeing the way that the system, it perfectly functions at these levels to operate the individual by extension through this mind control and program, and that's happening to effectively happening to everyone all of the time, including Benton, to hopefully a lesser degree, and I would say provably to a lesser degree. And then, but I even see I see the programming and the mind control. I see it reacting in my own mind. Debatably or arguably, Benton has enough control of what's going on, and control is not even the right term, but is working with whatever's going on within Benton actively enough to to not have to play into that, to be able to resist the knee-jerk reaction, to see the knee-jerk reaction in the mind and then not to get swept away with it. And in fact, use it as, okay, this means something. The fact that my mind is just reflexively spitting this at me, probably other people's minds are as well. And, so having some notion of what the mind control represents, the actual content of the mind control and what specifically it might be seeking to accomplish, in a short period of time or in the moment. And then also realizing that Benton has an ability to decode and recognize a lot of this because Benton, underwent a long, arduous, difficult process of deprogramming himself from mind control of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Some of the code still remains, and some of it actually is helpful, but some of it does still remain. And again, every time I mention Watchtower Bible and Tract Society or the Jehovah's Witnesses, somebody somewhere gets the notion that I was a part of that. I wasn't. I never joined it. I never consented. Nobody ever asked me if I thought this was a good idea. I was born into it, and as an adult, never had one thing whatsoever to do with that organization. And I mean nothing. I left it when I was still a minor child, and I never joined it. But then I escaped it would be the proper term. I took my leave and made my escape, right? So these are all important distinctions to draw, because it's a very different thing. Someone who chooses to join that versus someone who has it inflicted upon them. And my own father did not seem to understand these dynamics. Multiple times I've had to check him and say, listen, man, I was born into it. That's very different than you being born into something else and then choosing to join it as a legal adult. That's not in any way akin to my experiences, because he would try to equate his experience to my experience with respect to the religion. And I'm like, no, absolutely not, sir. You're comparing an apple to an orange. And then again, what's not processing data? Well, this is a person who chose to allow an organization to mind control him. Of course, he can't think for himself. They programmed his mind and they ruined his ability to think for himself. In some ways, ruining his life. Because as we see, the system itself hobbles people's ability to think for themselves and incentivizes them to let the system do their thinking. And now the system packaging ideas and sending these ideas to individuals that comprise the masses through some, whether literal, figurative, or both, version of a push notification. And people prefer that. And that is a corporate structure. People prefer corporate structures. That's what's important to realize. So 15 minutes ago, I was on the verge of critiquing and criticizing the indefensible system. So I see a YouTube video, and where Tesla's apparently going to have to pay 245 million for somebody who died in a Tesla autopilot accident. And it says here Tesla lied and hid data to avoid autopilot crash blame. Well, of course they did. That's the America. That's the system of things that many people defend. It's it's a game of lies in a world of death. And if a corporation is incentivized to lie, it tells lies. Period. End of story. So we see the potential psychological damage whereby the default for the human, the default for the individual is notions of things are good, things are above board, the system mostly works, meaning corporations mostly tell the truth, corporations mostly do the right thing, and then here and there, stuff sort of goes wrong through incompetence or just maybe somebody dropped the ball, or occasionally just a bad actor, did a bad thing and maybe told a lie. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The system by design is lying to individuals on an ongoing basis into perpetuity. Right? It's a game of lies. It's a system of lies. It's never-ending lies every moment of every day of the individual's life. Right? It's never-ending lies. And one's own family will tell the lies. There's people in this so-called truth community that have given birth to children and are raising children, and at some point are most likely going to lie to that kid's face because of putting themselves in a position of being defenders of the system, just by virtue of how they live, and lacking the courage to just tell the kid, yeah, man, I hate to break it to you, but me and your mom chose to bring you into this thing, and it's lying to you 24/7. And your whole fucking life, this thing's going to do nothing but lie to you. Right? And any truth it gives you is going to be mixed with lies. All truths are merely half truths. Right? Well, invert that statement, Not all lies are 100% lies, I guess, would be the way that they contain something that's factual or has some actual basis in reality, perhaps. And then how is the individual, what level of intelligence, and I don't mean IQ, again, sophisticated idiots, right? Smart idiots is what people function as, because they become very sophisticated. I'm talking about deep, functional intelligence rooted in foundational basic principles, right? In a foundation of an examination of very basic principles, And I'll bring it back to, I'll try not to stay on the sports for too long, but when I decided I wanted to become good at basketball in my youth, I did what any person like myself would do. I went to the library and checked out a Larry Bird book of basketball drills. So I just somehow knew to master the basic fundamentals first. So I drilled myself. Now, some of that was because I wasn't good enough. I wasn't able to go into sophistication from day one. And if I wanted to be the best competitor possible, I just knew I must master these fundamentals. And I'm sure it said right there in the book, I'm sure Larry Bird or whoever wrote this book and put his name on it, Larry would have known, hey, you got to tell these people how important the fundamentals are, regardless of if they have athleticism or not, And I would have taken that to heart. Well, same thing here. If Benton is debatably intelligent, and, I know what the score is, certainly, but a lot of it stems from spending a great deal of time, effort, and energy into interfacing with and fully understanding basic fundamental concepts that most people, the system gets a lot of mileage out of encouraging people to, especially through advertising and the way people see themselves at the level of their own self-image psychologically through advertising, marketing and advertising. the system is actually, it's in the system's best interest to have people skip past the basic fundamentals and go right into sophistication, because a sophisticated, consumer, that's what would benefit the system, right? The vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. And as we see, consumer society has morphed into it, and it's been this for a while, right? But it's morphed into, consumer-driven society, and it's more the consumption of the rich folks, or at least the people who work closely enough with the actual rich folks so that, as administrators or, underlings, but high level people who get mistaken for elites, even though they're not, they still have access to enough resources to, buy luxury automobiles, buy a luxury home, a custom home, right? The people who have the money to engage in the consumption, and that the proletariat or the underclass or the masses simply, they're able to interface with some of it, but only to their own detriment, using credit cards, and, people living and putting an image on the social media as if they are affluent when they're not. And then again, back to the idea of America being the vanguard of scams and being scam nation. A lot of folks are embezzling from their job. A lot of folks are involved in scamming the government and have been for years and decades. A lot of people who live on a cul-de-sac in a nice neighborhood, historically, the reality of America is a lot of those folks did not go out into the world, do all the right things, work hard, get ahead, climb corporate ladders, and earn their position in the cul-de-sac. A lot of them, especially when social media came into the fray, what they're concerned about is being able to portray that image. And if they need to embezzle if they work for a church and they need to embezzle for 15 years and it takes 15 years to catch them, that's what they do. And it's 15 years of living in relative affluence and putting forth an image to the world. And then one day the cops show up and then they go to prison, right? Or whatever happens. And that's becoming more and more common, folks. And then, so some of what the government is doing through Social Security Administration is they actually, at least according to reports, a lot of that is being addressed and cleaned up. I mean, again, further proof that the system is indefensible and it's not representative of what it claims to be representative of, right? It's simply not. And again, people defending the system because they have no other choice, and who are going to end up lying to their children. So imagine bringing children here into a world of lies, a world of death and a game of lies, and on some level knowing it to be exactly that, and then creating new people and lying to the new people, right? At least partially lying to them, right? Now, if I'm wrong and they're going to sit their kids down and more or less explain the entire thing to them at some point, okay, great. Good luck with those kids fitting into society after that, right? Good luck with that, because I know mama's going to want to raise them where they're not going to be, any weirder than what they already are, perhaps. And then daddy might want to see them. What if they're good athletes or whatever? Daddy's going to want to see them, play sports perhaps, or whatever that is, all that normie type shit. Just normie things. Only 3 likes. We started the stream with 2. What is this, man? They don't like me anymore. Well, hey, buddy. Old Benton won't shut up about how what this place is makes an enemy of what he is, right? This place set up to make an enemy out of what I am. So maybe the realm is just saying, yeah, buddy. Well, and now that most of the pretense has fallen away, then you get less likes on your channel, partner. Right? Because we ain't fooling you anyway. So maybe YouTube's letting me know. Thank you. I see a couple more came in. YouTube's letting me know what it really thinks of my content, perhaps. And I'm not victimized at the levels of that, but it is funny watching the views go up and then go back, and I understand, roll backwards, the views going backwards, but also understanding that YouTube chalks that up to something called invalid views, and as they define it, could mean damn near anything. Really just a legalese way for them to manipulate the views, which they were already able to manipulate, because how would I know the difference? And imagine people who, as much as people like to say YouTube's not a job, well, for some people it is. And then, what is even the level of being able to, there's really no way to know what the actual views are, is there? And then, so people are more or less taking the word of their business partner, Alphabet, Google, YouTube. But yeah, the whole thing's nuts, man. So yeah, of course, Tesla lied and hid data. That's what corporations do. That's what they do by design. There's not a corporation in this country that doesn't tell lies. When it's in the corporation has to tell lies when it's in the best interest of the corporation in a competitive, in what is, otherwise a competitive environment. But then further seeing that corporations, once they reach a certain size and level, simply will not compete with one another. And that's the idea of, I think it was Rockefeller might have said it a long time ago, or JP Morgan, or who knows, but it's all the big boys at the table, and they're like, competition is a sin. you know Funny how in my world some version of a southerner is not necessarily unintelligent, or you know unable to become a rich fat cat, or can't ever be born into a wealthy family. Isn't that funny? Because a lot of other people that only invoke the southern accent with to sound, because something calamitous, or there's been someone's fallen into foolishness and error, or somebody's just dumb, right? It's got to be a southern accent. And I'm never ever a full white person just on that. Culturally, I'm never a regular full white person, because I'm from the South and have a southern accent. And it is one of my favorite things about being in California is, yeah, I will never fully be one of these people. It's just simply not possible. But then, even back home, I was never fully whatever they are. It's that they have to fucking deal with me and tolerate me on some level, because I came from what they came from. It's very interesting anthropologically, or culturally, or sociologically, or whatever we want to call it. Very interesting. Very interesting. Oh, now he's using an Asian accent. All right. And I myself find it hilarious when one of these scientists has one of these crazy Southern accents. And you're just like, he must really be a good scientist for the other scientists to tolerate the way this bozo talks. He must really know his shit. Because some people might be confused and say, how in the world could somebody that talks like that become such a high level scientist? And my thing is like, oh no, actually, this is exactly how you know how high level this motherfucker is, because he got to that level in spite of how he sounds. And he's, went through all of this education and attainment, and he still sounds like that. Just imagine. It's like that's never going to wear off, sadly. And some folks may not know that I actually made it to adulthood without a very strong accent. And I don't know what happened exactly, but when I was studying for my Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer certification way back in the day in the late 90s, this is before I was married, but I was with my first wife. We just weren't married yet. And I left her for about 9 months and went and lived with my parents. And she had a roommate. And then I was studying, living with my folks, to not have to work a job. Actually, I was working for my dad, now that I think about it, like 2 days a week, and going down to his convenience store when he still had it, and helping out with the management of that 2 days a week, so that his regular manager could have her time off or whatever she needed. And I used 6 months of that to get my Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. Did it all on my own, passed every test, $100 test. So what's that in today's money? $600. And the books were, even on Amazon back then, it's quite expensive. And why did I bring that up? Oh, that's in a different. By then they had moved. My parents had moved to a completely different part of the state. And it's actually the most isolated. It's the most geographically isolated part of Arkansas that actually has, a town and a Walmart, and it's just that there's nothing else in the area. And I somehow picked up the fucking country sounding accent. I've just never been able to shake it. So that's what happened there. Anyway, maybe it's for a reason. Hopefully, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. A little bit of old Benton's biography, if anybody's curious. And then it is a bit surreal, and I'll try to say this without bragging, but um, uh, it is a bit surreal to be in LA where the my grandfather played for the Rams the year they came to Los Angeles, and that was the first major professional sports team on the West Coast. Interestingly, the Rams moving from Cleveland, the defending NFL champion Cleveland Rams moving to Los Angeles in 1946, and then the psyops even back then, because the big controversy at the time was that the LA Coliseum, where the Rams were slated to play, the first pro sports team, major pro sports team on the West Coast. Well, the controversy on the West Coast, and this shows you the climate, the culture, the way America has been, psyoped and managed and compartmentalized and fragmented and segmented from day one, was that, well, black folks were taxpayers in Los Angeles and public money built the Coliseum, and therefore the local people were like, hey, if we're going to bring a team here, y'all need to have some black players, or at least the pressure. The official fiction of the news stories was that we need black players, because if the team's going to play in the stadium was paid for by the taxes of black folks in part, they should be represented on the team, right? But it was a climate in which certainly there would have been Latinos, right? Like, why were the Latins left out of this? Why were the Asians left out of this? Funnily, but yeah. So then the NFL, which had not had black players since 1933, there's some numeric coding perhaps for some of the folks might pick up on the 1933 there, but and then the 33 coding being all over my grandfather's sports career also. Big time ties in with 30, huge tie in with the 33 in my grandfather's sports career. But the point I'm trying to make is, funny how that was the narrative. So that LA ended up with two black players that season. And then so the NFL went from segregated back to integrated. So yeah, just things I think about. And then properly identified, much less likely to want to brag about, the accomplishments of the ancestors, But if anybody's curious about the 33 coding, well, in an NFL record, 10 catches for 303 yards on the 11th month of the 22nd day of the 11th month of 1945. So 11/22/1945. So 11 and 22, there's another 33. His college number was 33. Some of his aggregated totals, there's 33 codes in there, and there's a lot of 13 codes also. In fact, his pro number was a 1349, which reduces to 13. If you don't then reduce it to a 4, of course. Funny how that works. But yeah, good times. And what does that all even mean? And then, my dad, as a boomer, going down his own, at a certain point, and he was an early adopter of the internet also because of myself. And so him, getting interested in conspiracies in the aughts, and willing to entertain some conspiracies. He said that he went with his dad, my famous ancestor football player, my dad's dad, that they went to the funeral of Red Parker, who was also a professional football player, and I think who also went to Arkansas for college. And that after the funeral, so my dad and my grandfather went to this funeral for Red Parker many, many years ago. And he said, and this is where, for some reason, my family has this bad habit of not asking a follow-up question, but He said that his dad said after the funeral, he said that was a Rosicrucian uh, funeral. And my dad mentioned that to me, and I was like, "What does that mean?" He's like, I don't know what he means." I mean, we can look up what Rosicrucian is, but it's like, I don't know why. I have no idea. So then what, was my grandfather knowingly or unknowingly involved? He obviously knew enough to know what Rosicrucian was. So I don't fucking know. Who the fuck knows what I was born into? No idea. I know that, if we, and I've done, back when I did the podcast, nightmaredystopia.com podcast, which was quite popular during the pandemic. It no longer exists except on the Wayback Machine, archive.is, I believe is the website. You can still find it on there, nightmaredystopia.com. Um, I did an entire podcast about some of this stuff, but I had brought on a guest who knew a lot about the Freemasonic origins of the NFL, and then recognizing that three of the most famous, what is now considered to be a wide receiver, the position was called end because back then, players played both offense and defense, but that actually more than three, but there was, for some reason, the region of Arkansas that we're all from, my grandfather's from, my dad's from, Bear Bryant is also from, and he was one of the most famous people in the world in the 1960s. That's not an exaggeration. From Podunk, Arkansas. Don Hudson, who always makes the NFL all-time teams as a receiver. He was considered the best wide receiver of all time way back when the NFL made the 75th anniversary team. He's from my hometown, actually, Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And then, so why were all these white guys that all played the same position, why are they all from the same part of Arkansas, right, more or less? And then knowing the federal government having a huge presence in Arkansas, the first federally protected land that even predates the formation of the national park system was Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas, even though it wasn't called that. When they did these national park quarters, the first one that they put out was Hot Springs National Park, even though that was not technically the first national park because it predated the system itself. That was the first time the federal government said, we're going to set that land aside for our own use, and the feds we're going to manage that. That was Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas. Again, same general vicinity. And then my house growing up is 5 miles as the crow flies from the National Centers for Toxicological Research. So who the fuck knows what the feds were doing and continue to do in that area? I don't fucking know. I know this, there's no way it's a coincidence that my grandfather retired from the NFL and was the second leading receiver in NFL history, and number one was Don Hudson, who's from the same fucking part of Arkansas. And he went to Alabama and was All-American with another person who played the same position, who was also an All-American, Bear Bryant. And him and my grandfather went to the same high school. Bear Bryant, I believe, is slightly older. Then they both became football coaches, and Bear Bryant almost went to Arkansas to become the head coach when he then went to Alabama to become the head coach, and literally was one of the most famous people in the motherfucking world. His hat, that houndstooth hat, was one of the most famous images in the fucking world, not just the U.S. And, my own grandfather, if not for politics, probably would have been the head coach at University of Arkansas, most likely. And it's like, why did all of this happen? Like, how did all of this happen? What the fuck does all of this mean? What the fuck is happening? I don't have those answers, but it's very interesting to think. And then and then now here I am, and my dad joins a fucking cult. And as we know, that cult, the Jehovah's Witnesses, has big tie-ins with various secret societies, including the Freemasons. And in fact, one of the two founders of the fucking religion is buried underneath a pyramid, right? Uh, a very powerful symbol, and then the watchtower itself is a one of these Freemasonic symbols, to my understanding. So I mean, what in the hell's going on here? What was Bentham born into? I don't fucking know. Um, it's all quite bizarre, certainly. And apologies for sidetracking into that, but it's good to restate that from time to time. We might have new listeners, and perhaps one day the live chat will return. It's just it bothered me too much that one day where I had a couple of long time listeners that greeted. There was two comments, two people I've known for a long time on here, uh, greeting me and wishing me well, and then one person like 20 chats. And this was when the stream was over with, and just having a go at me and what about isms, and well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? It's like, you know, yeah, why don't I turn off the live chat is what I took out of those comments. Like, why even have a live chat? Because I'm certainly not going to be monitoring it in real time like I used to. So turn it the fuck off. And some people will still listen, so grateful for that, certainly. Um, and then bringing it back to Benton and all of this. So what's there really to do, man? Like, what's there for old Benton to do today? Not much. Maybe you have a BM, right? I got too hungry last night, and I ate a bunch of, not too many, right? I've taught myself not to overdose on the nuts, but I've been craving pistachios for some reason lately, and I bought like a 5.5 ounce, 6 ounce bag of. Oh, and here's another thing about the system lying to you. You read it's a 5.5 ounce bag, and you turn it over, and it says serving size 1 ounce, number of servings 6. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not 5.5. And then it's like, oh, about 6 servings. Oh, okay, well, there we go. So I had half the bag earlier in the day and half the bag later. So the old digest, and I usually don't eat that late in the day. It was like 7 p.m. and some of the old digestion's mulling some of that over. But everything's going to be all right on that level. I already had my dark chocolate, get a little bit of caffeine and theobromine, and had my first egg drink, and I'm going to have the second egg drink after this, and go buy more eggs, and then grateful to be able to buy the eggs. Still have access to resources somehow, even though I'm not out here slaving away to make rich people richer, and I'm not out here, paying for things I might not want to pay for, the activities of the federal government. Yeah. So that's where old Benton's at today, and go to the library and charge the old power bank. Keep the devices charged up. That's a constant battle. Yeah, wild, man. Might do a little preaching, a little street preaching, perhaps not. So kind of just when the spirit, when it seems appropriate, preaching on Jesus here and there. But the power, see, that's the relevant thing. With respect to the internal space, the energy sphere of the individual, right? The sphere of influence, and my only power being inside myself. Well, hey, I'll take all the power I can get as long as it's divorced from iniquity and evil and antithesis. Well, to be filled with the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, and via Christ consciousness, right? And be properly identified with what I am and what I know myself to be, at my core essence, one with the most super intelligent force of love, force and power of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, right? The blessing itself, the highest authority, right? In fact, the only life possible here. Life cannot originate from this place. Anything that originates from this place, by definition, is dead. Anything. Because remember, what I am did not originate here. So yes, the body seems to be alive. It's animated. The body is animated. In fact, physicality doesn't exist because it's all vibrating energy, or so we're told, right? I don't have the scientific ability to verify that. Now, it seems to make sense. It feels right. But how do I know? Well, and again, intuition, knowledge gained outside of logic and reason, I seem to know, but certainly on the lookout for evidence to the contrary. And as we know, with the waking dreams, surrealistic elements of unreality, more of a something, akin to a dream or a projection, right? A hologram seems to make a lot more sense than, with the delusory elements. It can't be as it presents itself. And then, YOLO, right? You only live once. Well, I guess that's true. If what I am is one with the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible, an indivisible force, and it's only ever a one, right? So I guess what I am only does live once. But the trial can't be measured because time and space and place exist only within delusion. So only within the context of a delusion is that potential measurement even possible. That's a distinction that's only drawn in the context of delusion. So again, doesn't even hold up, at that level, right? So the intelligence, again, mentioning intelligence earlier, the being would necessarily need to raise its own vibrational and awareness, conscious awareness, mind, body, and spirit within oneself, the internal bootstrapping, to be able to develop and work with their own intelligence enough to make these distinctions in the moment on an ongoing basis, right? In service of what I am. And that's my job to do, right? And to allow truth and authority and creation to powerfully express through me into the delusion for the purposes of what I am, while trusting and accessing the yin form, the passive form, the feminine form, and accepting that, well, I'm on a Benton, the performer, in the context of the performance, is on a need to know basis with respect to the business of the Most High, or, air quotes, God's business, right? And then the folly of the Christians, so-called, where they want to serve that, or they claim to want to serve that, or even, perhaps feeling obliged to serve that, but then imagining what that would look like and then proceeding forward based on their own imaginings. But why would they know ahead of time what it's going to look like to actually serve that force, especially if what they are is one with that force? And then that's how we end up with people harassing me because they've predicted ahead of time, or someone else has predicted that service at some point is going to be, to serve that force is going to be to wander around a public park with a bag full of goodies to try to pawn them off on somebody like me. And if handed these items, I might take them, but then it's like, yeah, I'm just going to pass them on to somebody else. Like now I'm being given homework, right? What is this? It's harassment. It's harassment, and it's sort of a way to keep, also sys-agents, sort of, let's kind of keep an eye on the activities of these people to some extent. Well, it's such a surveillance state and grid at this point. What's the difference? And I think even some of these paranoid street people it's finally starting to dawn on them. Something I figured out at 10 years ago at minimum. It's like, because I've so often people think I might be a cop. And it's like, I think they're finally starting to realize, oh, the surveillance is so pervasive that there's not really street agents like there would have been in the past. Like, whatever was going on in the 60s and 70s, and even before that with the, McCarthyism and the Red Scare, whatever the government and the powers that be would have needed to do with human beings on the street level, that's all over with because of how all pervasive and all seeing the surveillance is. There's no need for street agents. Meanwhile, Benton here never would have, if Benton had chosen to actually join the government, and as far as I know, nobody's ever in my family's ever worked for the government, but if for some reason I had chosen to work for the feds, my own skills and talents, I'm pretty sure would not have been involved in being a street level agent. And if so, it wouldn't have been for very long, you know, and especially the type of agent that would be following, that would be uh, you know, concerned with the very mundane activities of street level drug addicts. It's like, come on, man. You know how good I would have been at this shit with my tested in the 99th percentile and whatever skills and talents I have. I mean, come on, man. This is crazy to think that I would be the one again, unless I'm doing it unknowingly, right? Unless I lack the awareness, unless I'm not aware of it. But I'm pretty sure that's not the case. Although I have had a lot of bizarre interactions with law enforcement where I started to get the impression that there's when they run me on their computer screen, there's some sort of indicator to maybe leave Benton mostly unmolested, or that could be the guidance and protection of the Most High, right? Or it could be both. They say God, the cliche of God working in mysterious ways. Could be both. Hopefully, I'm still here. I looked down at the screen that said I needed to rotate the screen, but hopefully that doesn't cut us off from broadcasting. There's still 13 here, apparently. But yeah, I guess we'll end it there, perhaps. One moment. Let me see if there's anything pressing that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I don't think so. Mostly to save the bandwidth, which again may not even be necessary. I need to do a little more research and find out. But yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.